Career Counseling and Education Committee at ICN, Islamic Center of Naperville. So before we get started with the event, I just wanted to thank you all for coming spot on and right on time, even before that. And as many other folks, inshallah, are going to be joining, we'll just get going with at least the introductions and inshallah start the event. So today, and this is, so I'm just one of the team members. We have a few team members, and I wanted to thank them all as always. Alhamdulillah, it's a team effort, and we work together in bringing speakers from our community who have knowledge and experience in emerging technologies, cutting edge technologies, mainstream technologies, and share their knowledge with us. And the focus of this is really to share information with anyone who is interested in building their careers or even looking at changing whatever information they need with some of the new technologies that are coming up. So always welcome your feedback as well. And inshallah, towards the end of at the end of the discussion, inshallah, we'll share the contact information as well. And I'm sure you've been receiving emails from some of our team members already. So we have two speakers today. Just wanted to briefly introduce them. So the first speaker we have is Zubair Ghafoor. So Zubair is the principal and director of AI solutions at CDM Smith. He is leading the company's efforts in developing the state-of-the-art AI applications. So he's leading the entire AI solutions efforts at the company. He leads a team that develops the AI solutions, addressing the complex emerging issues in the industry. And his areas of focus includes computer vision, analytics related to the traffic operations, as well as evolution of smart cities. And Zubair, over the period of his career, has managed multiple national complex projects related to traffic planning, and also developed several technology solutions for his large clients, marquee clients. And it's interesting, his passion for AI goes back to his University of Cincinnati, where he did his master's in transportation engineering, and he performed research in artificial intelligence applications and transportation and engineering. Zubair, pleasure to have you here, sir. Inshallah, looking forward to getting some information from you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Second speaker we have is Imad Longi. Imad is a management consultant in artificial intelligence and robot process automation at Capgemini Invent. And he's also a CEO of, he's the CEO of Instra.ai. He finished his Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering and Management Sciences in June 2020. And before he actually graduated, he started an AI healthcare software company where he's the CEO. He's leading the technical, strategic, and business development workflows, and with 30 software developers, 10 UI and UX designers, and 5 business operations members reporting to him. So he just couldn't wait till he graduated, and he just started a company before that, which is awesome. In 2021, he joined Capgemini Invent as the management consultant in data analytics practice that focuses on artificial intelligence and other related technologies. Imad's experience is in artificial intelligence, including natural language processing, computer vision, and machine learning. And then there are many other things, like robot process automation, blockchain, cloud technologies that he's also, in a very short period of time, been working with. Thank you, Imad, for joining us. Looking forward to hearing your talk as well.
Thanks for having me.
So everyone, a couple of just one item related to Q&A. You have all been muted, and but we would like this to be an interactive session. So if you could please, as you are listening to our speakers, if you have any questions, please put them in chat, and I will be reading them. I'll be looking at them and requesting the speakers to answer them as they come, first come, first serve. And again, just you can use the chat feature on WebEx, Thank you again for joining on time. And I will hand this off to Zubair. And Zubair and Imad, if you would like to please add any more to the introduction that I made, please do share any other information that you could to our attendees as well. And Zubair, I'll hand that off to you.
Sure, thank you. First of all, assalamu alaikum everyone, and really grateful to the committee and everyone else who facilitated this. And I'm really happy to be able to share a little bit of what I've done so far with our community. So just in addition to what Faiz just said, my exposure to AI goes almost early 90s. And I had the opportunity to deal with AI software development at a time after which AI almost went into what is called winter of AI. And then it came back during the last decade. And then knowing that the company I work for, I've been with them for almost 20 years, pulled me out of the traditional engineering tasks and traffic tasks, more to lead our company, this company, in AI solutions, which I'm really enjoying. So I think, Faiz, you covered it well. I don't want to go too far in there, but really happy to be here. So I'll hand it over to Imad. Introduce yourself more.
Yeah, I would say Faz covered everything really well. The only thing I would say is that even though, yeah, I'm a CEO, I'm still really new to AI. I've just really gotten into it in the past 2 or 3 years. And so just to everybody who's out there, don't underestimate how much you can learn in a couple of years. And it's all about just starting in the right place and just learning on your own, and then finding the right mentors to take you to the next level. And everybody who's here, Zubair and I both, I'm sure, haven't gotten here without the help of other people. And so it's just really important to identify those people and make a group and move forward. And that's hopefully one of the things that you'll take away from this as well.
So today in our discussion, we are hoping to cover multiple topics, but a lot, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, our focus is around the career counseling and education. So what we want to do, there's a lot in AI that is involved. So we are going to start with the beginning, and we'll talk about the definition and basic introduction to artificial intelligence. And then we'll dig a little bit deeper into artificial intelligence and talk about the general areas of the applications. What I've seen the slides, and I'm really thrilled to be looking at some of the examples of the use cases. And I'm sure you're gonna all find them really interesting. And then there are some underlying technologies, as you may know or may learn, artificial intelligence is comprising of so many different technologies. We'll talk about them as well. Then we'll get into the career focused areas. So that's where the speakers will talk about the skill sets that are involved or required in different job, responsibilities, opportunities out there. And then they will also share the career growth tracks, and then also give you some tips on the learning opportunities, and also point you to some resources that are available. And then at the end of it, we will have a survey where we'll be looking for your feedback on what other information that you could learn, that you would want to learn, that we may not be able to cover, because ultimately we intend to make this a track for artificial intelligence discussions. So this is just the beginning. So please keep that in mind as well. It's going to be a journey that we are hoping we can take with our speakers here. So thanks, Zubair, for this. Any questions?
Great, thanks a lot. So,
go ahead.
Sorry. So thanks a lot, Faiz, and we'll just get going. So before we move, I would like to make sure that things are working. Sorry. So yes, I would begin with just a basic definition of AI. If you search AI definition, you'll find many definitions, but the core concept is that AI tries to develop computer systems which can perform tasks that are generally associated with humans, including visual perception, speech, and many others. So that's basically the main concept, that traditionally we know computer systems as able to perform computational tasks only, while there is a very uh, strong computation which happens in the background of AI processes. But the end result is that we are trying to emulate the thought process of human experts. The second part of this slide that you see on the right, the goal here is not to have you read through the very small text. If you search AI timeline, you'll find this and many other images like that. The point that I'm trying to make here is basically three things. One is that AI has a history going back to the 50s. And then secondly, as I mentioned, somewhere in the late 60s through mid to late 90s, something happened which basically is documented as the winter of AI. What happened was that while in the 50s and 60s, the theoretical concepts and the neural network theory and everything else was being developed and validated that it has the potential to work. But the hardware requirements for these type of things was so high that they did not get that type of traction that they could. But then in the late 90s, it started picking up with the developments in hardware and web-based resources. And the bottom, you see some names that you are familiar with, for example, Siri and Watson and Alexa. These are all modern day examples of major AI implementations. One more thing that I would like you to do at some point, go and search in YouTube for AlphaGo. AlphaGo was and you'll see how significant this was. This was an AI-based program that was developed by Google. Go is an old Chinese game, like a board game. And this game, there was a champion of that who was beaten by an AI counterpart of that. So you'll just understand how significant this was to the AI community. So whenever you have time, you can just watch those or some of those videos. Very interesting to see. And going after 2017 and onwards, we have seen a major growth and almost exponential growth in AI. And it's now all over us. Everyone has AI in their pockets these days. So that's the goal here, that I just wanted to touch briefly on the history and the basic definition of AI. So a little bit more on the some statistics, that revenue from AI sources is growing rapidly in various forms. Companies internally developing AI and saving on money, and on the development side, different developers and even the industry that deals with the AI trainings, including big players, have developed platforms, and it's generating a lot of revenue. Then another thing that is important to know is that organizations are embracing AI, and those who don't, as you see, 37% is the number from last year. I'm sure it has grown now. So it's the trend now, and what is being said is that companies which don't embrace AI will really be left behind, and they will not be in a good position. Again, a few more statistics here, that the global market is expected to grow almost 54% year on year by 2025. So these are all, very strong indicators that AI is a very strong market, and from an employment and career perspective is a great track, especially for those who are in relatively earlier stages of their career, could offer a lot of growth potential. With that, before we go into some more technical details, I wanted to talk about this graphic, which basically on the right, you see a figure which shows the three large circles. One is artificial intelligence, the other is big data, and the other deals more with the specific issues, data mining and data science in general. So the point that is important to understand that while there is overlap between big data and AI and data mining and data science with AI, but they are not AI. They are obviously, they have overlaps with AI. AI in itself contains three broad I wouldn't call it branches, while the caption here is branches, that there are three sub areas. One of them is machine learning, and within machine learning, there is a deep learning. And if you want to differentiate those, just understand that deep learning is that basically these are training based model development, which deep learning is. And you'll see many examples of that, mostly focused on computer vision. And I'll tell you why we want to focus on computer vision. So another expansion of what you just saw, that while AI covers many areas, broad areas being in the second tier of this graphic, the mid tier, machine learning, computer vision, natural language, NLP, and speech recognition and things like that. There are more as well, which are generally based on a combination of these. And under machine learning, we have sub areas, supervised, unsupervised, and I won't go into those. Then again, under computer vision is primarily object detection in an image. An image could be an image itself or collection of image forming videos. NLP, natural language processing, is also an extremely fast growing area of AI. A lot of developments, a lot of things that you can do, including interesting things like what is called sentiment analysis in audio. And many companies are using those kind of things. When we call customer center, before someone picks up, our call goes through many such filtering processes based on what we did last time. So if you fought last time with someone, your call will go to someone who can deal with you in a better way. That's how these companies are using these. Another example or another thought on major areas within AI, obviously e-commerce, navigation, all kinds of navigations, including what we do on the roads every day, robotics, no-brainer. Human resources is also something that is using a lot of AI resources in filtering resumes and many other things. Healthcare is something that we will know more a bit later, but the most significant development of computer vision in healthcare is in the diagnostics. So I sometimes talk about this in a way that a human radiologist may have seen, for example, 10,000 images of a particular type of tumor in his career. And if someone trains an AI model using 100,000 images, sometimes that AI diagnostic tool can outperform. It's not intended to replace humans, but the performance so far of these applications has been very powerful. And obviously agriculture. I once went to a meeting to Microsoft headquarters, and they were actually using AI to provide guidance on watering crops in areas which are extremely dry, so that they don't water in places where there's enough moisture in the ground, and using many AI resources to optimize the use of water in place. So AI in agriculture is also real. In gaming, those who play video games and those who may have some exposure to video game development, all video game development platforms have an AI element. So when you see a car tumbling and able to regain its balance. Some AI algorithms are playing a part there. Again, automobiles, social media. I don't want to go into each one of these, but just to let you get a sense of where AI is and where is it headed. And don't think of this as a all-inclusive list. There is a lot more happening with AI. I'll just take a pause here. I don't want to be just myself speaking. Is there any question, comment, or thoughts on anything so far?
It would be interesting to know if any of the attendees have seen AI in any of these industries, and if you can share that in the chat, that would be great to see if you have had any exposure to artificial intelligence related areas as well.
Great. So keep in mind throughout the process, throughout the program, we can take a pause and look at the chat window and see if there are things that are related. So another thing before we start sharing some examples, if some of you may be familiar with Gartner. Gartner is a research institute which performs all kinds of predictions and forecasts. One of the things that they do is what they call hype cycle, and they do it for many industries. The goal of hype cycle is that generally when technologies take off, there's a lot of hype behind them, that this technology is going to turn the world upside down and do things that are never thought of. So they track of real world implementations and status, if you will, of where that technology stands. So on the y-axis, a graph. So on the x-axis is time, and on the y-axis is expectations. So as you generally see in this curve, that when technologies take off, first there is a lot of hype around them. People think that it'll just change everything. Then that hype dies down, and then reality starts sinking in to a point that some of those technologies actually take off and become real-world productivity tools. So what I wanted to share here was that inside this dashed oval, we have chatbots, autonomous vehicles, and computer vision, which are basically past this hype cycle when people were talking about all that hype stuff, while still some of the things that we talk about are still coming out of it. For example, data labeling and annotation services. A lot of companies are starting doing this, natural language processing. These things are coming down, machine learning and cloud-based services, deep learning. All these things are past the hype cycle. And so this area is also extremely important for us to see that all these areas, sub-areas within AI are approaching the point where they will start becoming mainstream technologies and productivity tools in our everyday life. Something for us to keep in mind. From this point on, I will start sharing some examples.
Yeah, sorry about that. So a couple of folks basically shared that, Hazrat shared that they are using machine learning to auto adjudicate claims in their company. And Eamon shared that they're using AI in healthcare at their company as well. So there are some of the folks have seen them. One question on the chat is, how do you think the legal industry will use AI in future? Areas that law firms can explore. I don't know if you either of you.
Actually, law firms are already using it. I saw a full publication somewhere last year that had a small, like a brochure of where they're using. A lot of that is done in what is called text extraction from thousands and thousands of, actually Microsoft developed that AI-based process that can sniff through thousands and thousands of pages of PDFs, for example, and extract certain keywords, which may or may not be directly. It's different from traditional search, which was more mechanical. It is more like the algorithm tries to understand what you're going after. So that's something that is already there. Machine learning based algorithms being used to extract information, because lawyers traditionally then have to go back and read through a lot of the legal books and things that generally when we see offices of lawyers, on the back there is a big shelf full of books, as we all see. So there are processes that are being designed to extract information and support that process. At least that's what I know so far.
Mhm. Are there any fields that you believe AI should not be applied to?
Are you asking me?
Yes, there's a question on the chat
Oh,
side.
sorry. Well, AI is it's hard to say should not be applied to. It should be applied in a different way. Because let me give you an example from my industry. There is a federal requirement for companies to perform structural integrity survey or inspection of bridges. So bridges which are on major rivers, there is a federally mandated requirements to go and inspect those for potential. That is something that explicitly requires human intervention. The way we are using some drones and AI-based processes, and even in case of some of the wind turbines that drones were used to, they were first trained to locate potential problems, and then those images were captured. Then human intervention was much simpler to review those areas which were defined or potentially captured by an AI process. So there are areas where AI should not replace. A broad guideline would be wherever human life is at stake in a very serious situation, probably at least present day AI may be a little bit risky there. And regulators and lawyers are trying to regulate. A lot of companies are coming up with specific regulations around AI. So yes, there will be some places where they will say that AI should not be used here.
Thank you, Zubair.
You're welcome. All right, great. So feel free to keep adding and we will definitely deal with the other questions so that we can keep moving. So I'll begin with some videos. So just to let you know the background, what will happen here is that when I start this video, the numbers that you see on the right are coming from an AI-based process which detected the presence of the vehicle, tracked it, and then classified that between car and truck. This is a early version, so you may see. But the point that I was trying to make here is that there are several things happening here, at least 3 or 4 things. One is that when a vehicle enters in this zone, it is detected that there's a vehicle. That's an AI step detection. Then, as it's moving through this zone, this video is 30 frames per second. So every second, there are 30 images that it's looking for. And then in each image, it's keeping track of successive appearance of the same object. So if this car appeared here 1 second ago, then it came. So there are what is called tracking algorithms that keep track of objects appearing in videos in successive frames. Highly computation intensive task, and these tracking algorithms have been developed. Then obviously the third part, which is counting, is relatively simpler. But when something like this is happening using an AI-based process, a lot happens in the background as far as computation. Here's another example of that same concept, but applied to a more complex scenario, which had one of the projects that we were involved with, that we had to divide that area into multiple regions. Here are, and as you see, the lighting conditions are also bad. And this was across the border on the Mexico side. So we had to classify these, count and classify vehicles in these bins that you see, car, truck, bus, and bike, and also identify how many people are actually backing off, like this guy just did, because he went into the wrong lane. So as you can see that for a human to go through hours and hours of this type of video would be a really difficult task. And AI makes it much easier. And during this project, we had processed close to 3,000 such videos. So again, another example that I wanted to share is this one, that the point that I wanted to make, as I mentioned, the concept of tracking, that this ID that you see on top of each object is a unique ID that the AI algorithm assigns to an object as it enters into the zone where it's looking at. Then it assigns that a unique ID and tracks it as it's moving through the video. So that number remains unchanged because it's keeping track of that vehicle or that object for that purpose as a unique object moving through the video. Again, video is 30 frames per second, a lot of calculation happening in the background. And this process is called tracking. And in recent years in AI, tracking has become much more powerful to the extent that when I began, in my current job about 4 years ago, we were working with a Microsoft team. They were hardly able to develop a process that was processing 5 frames per second of such videos. And then right now, there is NVIDIA hardware which is able to process videos faster than the actual video. So if it's a 5-hour video, it can be processed probably in hour and a half or 2 hours, something like that. So a lot of developments taking place.
There's a question, Zubair, can these algorithms detect speed of the vehicle?
Yes, sure. Actually, we just did that. There are various ways of detecting speed. There are complex ways and simpler ways. Obviously, we need distance and time. So since the camera in this case is mounted at a height, you can use some trigonometric algorithms to detect distance, and time is captured the way we did it. Let me go back to how we did it. In this particular case, we know what is the length of these dashes. So we created a detection zone. We draw a line here, for example. And when the vehicle crosses here, the algorithm detects what frame number was this. So it keeps track of this frame and that frame. Then it knows it took these many frames to travel through this zone, and it converts that to time. And distance can be determined by the physical means. So this is how we are doing it. But I know that people are doing all kinds of things. There are papers, a lot of papers on doing this. Some people are, the traditional ways were using radar detectors, but we are using it that way. So broad answer to that is yes. There are some issues with that camera position, camera angle, because when camera is at an angle, the same number of pixels represent different distance depending on where that object is in the video. So if I go in that, it will start taking too much time. But broad answer is yes, it is being done.
Thank you.
Anything else you want?
One question related to this video. Does the algorithm track
Mhm.
and count objects in these videos in real time? Or is it a backlog, like afterwards it's done? It's happening all
Yes,
real
that's
time?
exactly what I was telling earlier when I mentioned that about four years ago, until 4 years ago, the video streaming, the AI algorithms and the hardware was unable to keep it real time. So there was a backlog. There used to be a backlog. Now it is actually, so if there is a faster video, if there is a, for example, recorded video of 5 hours, the inference process can run that faster than that in much less time than that. So yes, real-time detection tracking is actually being done. We developed some algorithms to detect wrong way. So if someone is detected in a wrong direction, things like that have to be instantly detected. And the algorithms have become, and it's more of a function of hardware. Some companies, including NVIDIA is probably the the leading at the leading edge, while others are as well, in creating AI hardware, which basically can process these things very fast. So real time is there, and we're able to process videos in real time, even actually multiple videos. So very easily 30, 40 videos can be processed in real time using a single processing device. Great. So let's move on, and feel free to circle back. Again, this is just another example of, instead of vehicles, the AI algorithm is keeping track of pedestrians. And as you see, individual pedestrian kept track of. And the number that you see changing is just a probability of 1 to 100. How sure is the algorithm that this is a person? And in most cases, it's very high. In most cases, a lot of times we set this threshold. It's almost like how sure the algorithm is that it's a person. So moving on to the next one, here's another example of that same concept to bicycles, that it was able to detect bicycles. So in all of these cases, whatever is being detected can be written to a database, can be sent to the cloud, can be performed some real-time analytics and the message sent back. So a lot of things can be done once this metadata is captured from videos. This is a slightly different example, again, a real example, slightly different because the objects are not moving. The issue here is that when we have major natural disasters, they cause a lot of damage to structures, especially along the coastline. So this was an example from a hurricane that happened in Mexico Beach City. So the top left imagery is a satellite imagery before the Hurricane Michael. And then on that imagery, we developed an algorithm which does not create bounding boxes. It's a different detection algorithm which basically masks that object. So what you see in blue is the presence of a structure detected by the AI algorithm. Now, the hurricane happened, and as you see in this top left video image, a lot of structures are completely wiped off. So and this is a small area that I'm showing you, and the actual area affected was much larger. So then the same algorithm was ran, and you can see that it could see the structures that were still intact. So this way, that imagery was then subjected to that AI model, which was able to identify structures that were still intact. That way, this really helps us, and all this area that you see here, thanks for enabling this, which were damaged structures, was much. And again, this is one of those things that has many uses. So using this information, two things were done. So how do I come out of this mode? Sorry. So what was done earlier was that if the process filtered if the structures were there or not there. Now the next level, basically that information was used to create a heat map. What you saw was basically this area, which was shown earlier here, in this area in general, which you see red showing a lot of structures are damaged here. So agencies are interested in knowing where most damage occurred as well as where least damage occurred, so that they can try and understand the nature of structures which remain intact, during that disaster so that they can modify their building codes and see if they can implement this type of such design and construction for the future. So there are many such examples. This last one is a little bit different, which I would. And you'll be surprised to know this, that there is a whole bunch of people who actually get certified in inspecting videos of sewer lines to locate potential problems. And this is actually an actual project that we developed an AI algorithm that could detect problems in sewer lines. Several 100,000 feet of video was used in developing this algorithm, that the machine is going through the sewer lines, and then when it finds some potential issue, it identifies that. And for example, roots here, you saw that box appeared, and it writes that to an algorithm, to an external file. So you see that in filtering water. So it can do all kinds of different things. Going from that point on, I don't want to bore you with this whole video, so I will just show you a few spots that may be interesting, but then go on roots and things like that. So I will stop here and go to the next video. So from here, I will request Imad to explain some of these, which are some interesting examples that he has. Let me clear this.
Before you get to this, actually, there's one question. These object detection algorithms, and are there libraries available through open source for these kind of things?
Yes, a lot of stuff is open source, and that's really the interesting part, that so much work has been done and so much information is available as open source resources. We kept this seminar rather high level. There are pre-trained models, several of them. One is YOLO, stands for You Only Look Once. YOLO is a pre-trained, freely available model that you can implement for object detection. It is trained on close to 80 objects, and you'll find it funny when you find a list of objects. It includes many everyday things, forks and spoons, to cars and trucks, to planes and ships, and even some fruits and things like that. But then what can be done is that you can take a pre-trained model and augment that with some specifics. So the vehicle detection algorithms that you saw, we began with a pre-trained model, but then we added close to 100,000, 80,000 images. So we reinforced that in the area of vehicle detection. So yes, that's a good question, and a lot of open source information is available. That's the great thing about AI, that very seldom you need to do something from scratch.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, Imad.
Right, yeah, thank you so much, Zubair, for those all those examples. Here, I'll go through some more examples. These are going to be more specific to healthcare, and then I'll speak about the generic nature in which we write these algorithms such that they can be applied to any kind of objects. But right now, we're focused on brain surgeries. So if you go to the next slide, this first slide is just a tray, and if we go to the next one, then we'll see how we detect the bounding boxes. So there's two elements in computer vision and also in the videos that Zubair shared. So the first element is detection of drawing these rectangles around the different objects. So first you need to identify what is the space in which the object that you're looking for, where is it? And if you draw these boxes too large, then you're going to take into account too many other items. And if you draw it too small, then you're not going to be able to see all of the details of the item and properly classify it. So first, after you've determined that location of that object, Then the next aspect is the classification, which you see with the serial numbers. So you're classifying what is that object. And then if you go to the next slide, what we do is once we've classified all of the objects, we cross-reference them with a database that we have in AWS. And I'll speak about cloud computing a little bit later. But we cross-reference what do we detect versus what was supposed to be there according to the manuals and everything. And then if we go to the next slide, we'll highlight where are those objects supposed to be and what is missing so that you can make sure that you have the right instruments, because a lot of these instruments can look really similar to the naked eye. And so this is something that Zubair also spoke about earlier with what are some areas that you don't want AI to be involved, you don't want AI to be making decisions in. And this is an example, I would say right now, you don't want this AI to be the last resort that makes the final decision if this tray is good or not, but you want it to be more there as a validation tool that you take a picture and it just double checks for you. But still, the human is making the last decision. The human is still looking at this and saying, okay, yeah, that's what the AI is telling me, but oh, actually, this is what we need to do for this specific situation. And then the way that we write these algorithms is a way that you can change these objects. These could be anything you see, like it could be just any kind of object, any kind of inventory. It doesn't have to be specifically these instruments. All you need to do is take pictures of those new objects, and then they'll go through all of our different pipelines to get all the data that we need, and then retrain those models based on the new data that we retrieve. So now, if we go into the next slide, we'll see an example of, you can do the same thing for, instead of looking at the specific objects, you can look at the locations. You can develop a grid of where should all the screws be, and then identify where are there missing screws or where are the colors not aligned to what they're supposed to be. And then in the next slide, we can get into text recognition, which I think is really, really revolutionary also. And this is what they use for the legal applications, is that they're reading text. And the opportunities with AI for text recognition is such that even if this label, it changes the text change location on the label, let's say the reference ID, it's in the top right or the bottom left, the way that the AI will process it is it will be looking for what is the pattern of that reference number. So for here, the example is that there are a few digits, and then there's a letter, and then there's one last digit. So even if the reference location of the reference ID changes, you can still look for that pattern and still find it wherever it goes. So that's called unstructured data, when the locations of the texts are changing. And you can do the same thing for dates. Dates have a very specific type of format. So even if those change their location, then we can also account for that. And then in the next slide, you'll see what is the application of this, which is there's all these surgical implants. And right now, a sales representative, they have to count and validate that they have all the appropriate implants for the surgery that they're getting ready to do. But instead, they can just take a picture and use our AI to count, similar to how Zubair was counting the vehicles. We can count the text. It's even a lot more easier than that. So then you count that, and then you tell them, oh, this is the box you're missing, or this is, you have some extra boxes here, and then you can go from there. So I saw there was a question in the chat.
Yeah, yep. If the text is blurry, please go ahead.
Yep, if the text goes blurry, would the AI be able to apply some sort of filter to make it clear so that it could read it? So far, we do apply some different data augmentation steps to make it account for a smudged camera, and then you can sharpen the detail in some ways. But definitely that is something that you need to keep in mind, is that it might not work 100% of the time, and that you need to be aware that, hey, if there is this challenge, you need to be testing it for all the edge cases and all the different use cases, and you need to make sure that you have that incorporated in your data set, that you don't have just a perfect data set that has all the images clear and all the lighting perfect. You want to make sure that your data set has those inefficiencies in it, or those kind of different, all the use cases that you could possibly see. You want it to have the whole spectrum of the best case to the worst case, because if you don't have that worst case in your data set for training the model, then it's never going to be able to learn that. So yeah, I think that's really important for anything, to make sure that you also have the adverse conditions accounted for. And that's why testing all these kind of applications and testing the edge cases that are really going to be the most challenging is really important, to make sure that the AI is valid and can work in those kind of situations.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, good question. And then here, we'll get into some of the offerings that Instra.ai has. So some of the different areas are, first of all, real-time location tracking of your medical equipment. So that goes with our object recognition. All we have to do is we have to tag what is the location that this image is getting taken, what is the location and time that this image was taken at. We can integrate into billing operations, because what happens in billing is that you have a sales representative who has to look at all the instruments, and they have to see what was here or what was not here, what was used or not used, and then they have to see what implants were taken and put in to a patient. And so they have to do all these things. Instead, you can just take a picture of, here's a stack of all the used instruments, here's a stack of the unused instruments, take a picture of them, and then you can bill the hospital appropriately. Same thing for restocking operations. You can keep a camera in different locations to watch what kind of inventory are you running low on, and how much of it do you need to order. You can do the same thing for also quality assurance and making sure that these instruments are not too worn out or bent or broken. So that also goes from the object recognition. Another thing that our clients are looking for is optimization of their asset allocation. So this is more of a machine learning use case. So here, they're looking at, where do we want to send these instruments so that we make the most money and that they're used most frequently. So for example, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, here you can charge more for your instruments because you have the specialized surgeons, and you have people are willing to spend more money for their surgeries. So then we develop a heat map of where are your different instruments at and where should you send them to optimize the profits that you're making, to make sure that they're not just sitting in a storage facility and they're not generating revenue for you. Instead, you should send it to Chicago, or you should send it to New York, where there's surgeons that are looking for this and they'll pay extra to get it. And then here we take into account the different variables of changing fuel costs, storage costs, depending on the location, and then the regional price of that instrument in that location. And then we can also do other analytics around financial reporting or any kind of manual data entry. So definitely I'd be really interested to hear if anyone can kind of take some of these ideas and sees that there's opportunities, any kind of a job, I would say, where people are counting things out manually, or they have to look at a piece of paper and then they have to type in, what does this say on the piece of paper, just to get it into a different database. Those are kind of all the applications that we're trying to optimize. So definitely, I'd love to hear from anyone who has any experience with areas that they think could be optimized around that. And then, yeah, we would be happy to work with them and develop it for them also. So yeah, definitely reach out to me after or during if you see any potential areas, because right now I think it's really about figuring out where are the use cases. There's so many use cases. So we started with brain surgeries because that's the highest value that we see right now. But there's also just so many more other use cases, and it's just about connecting the technology with the use case, and then figuring out what new modifications need to be made for those different edge cases and those different more challenging environments, and then you're ready to go from there. Yep, and then I'll give it back to Zubair.
Great, great. Thanks, Imad. This is exciting. As we see that if you start looking around, anything that we see around us these days can be a subject of AI and using AI one way or the other. People have developed algorithms to calculate calories by looking at your plate, by training an AI model. I was joking with my son that he was counting calories, and all of a sudden, I told him that, hey, look, there's, I think it's, there are several which are based on computer vision. So some examples, I won't go into examples of these. There's a lot of AI application in industrial automation in the form of predicting failure or prediction of failure based on certain data that is collected in real time and subjected to an AI algorithm, typically machine learning based. Sometimes these are also computer vision based. And we didn't talk about machine learning. Maybe that in itself becomes a separate presentation. Equipment failure, alternative energy, environmental and healthcare, huge area of application of AI. A lot of things which I got exposed to during COVID. It was found out that sewer water started showing signs of COVID about a week before the COVID test was able to do. So the environmental scientists from the company that I work for, they actually were, I think they were given some federal grant or something to investigate that further. And they found out that that was the case. So it was, I think it was called epidemiology, is that area that they were able to use computer vision, machine learning, sorry, in that area as well. A lot of environmental issues, predicting the growth of certain unwanted species. Someone from Florida once contacted us that there's a bad weed which grows on water that is stagnant. So they wanted us to be able to detect that and calculate how much area was that covering. So that was, again, very unique example. Someone came back and said, well, we do survey at airports, and we want to know the extent of birds around runways. So all kinds of problems keep coming, very interesting and sometimes very, very challenging. So I think from this point, we will start shifting to a different aspect of this whole thing. So far, we were trying to generate excitement, and I'm hoping that we generated enough excitement for all of you. We get excited. I get excited every time I talk about these things. So what we are trying to convey in this and some of the next slides is that how does the process of an AI model development happens and what kind of people are involved. And then we will also explain what kind of skill set can we take there and evolve into an AI person as our profession. So what you see here, starting from the left, is obviously defining a problem. Not every problem is an AI problem. So that's where we use subject matter experts. And then we have data gathering, which is a key issue in all kinds of AI. So as I mentioned for that sewer example, we use close to 300,000 feet of data to train that model, and close to 100,000 images to train or retrain the vehicular model. So the step that is called labeling and annotation, which involves someone marking in a video or in images what that object is. So a human is telling the program that this is a car, this is a truck, or this is a such and such type of medical equipment. The good thing is that now there are, which is funny to see, that there are AI-based services that companies are offering, which support you with the labeling process. So they are already detecting those. So they say, okay, we will filter those and label those for you. So there are a lot of companies doing that. Then next step is setting the framework. This is where the AI trained person starts coming into picture, setting the framework, what kind of model, and all those kind of things, testing and validation. Then we won't go into the rightmost area, not by don't go into, I mean, into the level of detail we will with AI, the left too. Obviously, once an AI model is developed, it has to be deployed somewhere, depending on what's the goal. It could be deployed on a website as a SaaS, or it could be deployed internally. There's a lot of work that company I work for, we're doing, using AI for doing our work better or more efficiently. So a lot of steps are involved. At the bottom, as you see this middle portion, junior and senior AI experts, and in the left, some data analysts. I sometimes call them data wranglers. Doesn't have to be AI, but the overlap that you saw in my early slides that we have with big data and AI is that overlap area that these type of people come into picture. So going from this, we start breaking that information into what kind of, and this is very generic. So for example, a data analyst obviously has to have basic data handling skills, spreadsheets, databases. I'm trying to make it generic enough that folks can appreciate that anyone with the basic skills can fit into this role, and with some Python be able to scrape some data from the web and all those kind of basic stuff. Then a junior level AI person could be a junior data scientist or not, has to come up with some basic understanding, conceptual understanding of AI, and needs to have strong computer skills, understand the caveats in annotation and labeling, and there are many. The AI model will give you funny results if annotation is not done correctly. And obviously image data resources. To be a senior AI person, one has to have a fairly deep understanding of the AI theory and neural networks and other frameworks, has to have good machine learning capabilities and understanding of AI frameworks, at least have a good handle on Python, and understanding and exposure to some of the major frameworks, such as Amazon SageMaker, which is the platform AWS offers so instead of writing all the Python code yourself, you can have an environment which let's say facilitates that. Both Amazon and Microsoft have that. One thing that I would just briefly mention here for us to keep in mind is a trend called low code and no code AI. It's a very emerging trend which has reduced the reliance or the necessary reliance on Python or other development. So almost like drag and drop type environments to develop AI models. So you can look more into that as well. On the development side, obviously specific to platform, AWS versus Microsoft or others, aspects of virtualization. One thing that Imad will talk more to, all these algorithms are implemented in virtual environments with the powerful virtual machines having GPUs. These are not things that you can run on even powerful laptops. Just a side note, for initial testing, you can use a gaming laptop because gaming laptops have GPUs. So a few years ago, I went to Best Buy and I asked for, I'm looking for a gaming laptop because I know that it has a GPU. So the person looked at me from top to bottom. I said, exactly why are you looking for a gaming laptop? He was a little bit skeptical of why am I looking for a gaming laptop. But gaming laptops are good for if you're trying to go into and test some of the open source algorithms, buying a good gaming laptop with a GPU would be a good point to start. And then drilling down further, a little bit more extension of what you just saw. Generally the same information, but a little bit more refined. So any of the folks on the call can contact either of us. Feel free if you want to talk about what trainings and things like that, which Imad will talk more to, and go from that point where you are to the point where you become directly involved in the AI industry in different capacities. So Imad, take over from this point.
Yeah, so we'll talk about a couple of different tracks that you can go on to enter the AI industry. So the first one is as a data analyst. Here you could start with any kind of prior work. A little bit of technical experience would be helpful, probably knowing a little bit of Python or R or something before you get into that could be helpful. But I'm sure there's also a lot of positions that are open to mentoring you and teaching you to be a data analyst, but to just show that you have taken some courses or you've tried some things on your own, I would say is the main thing that you should be looking for any of these positions, and anything you apply for is just showing, it just shows your interest and your motivation. If you can find some things online, you can always Google some things or reach out to people who you see are more senior and ask them what would they recommend as the best way to get started with any of these things. Another role could be as a junior AI developer. Here you'd need a little bit more technical experience, but you can also come from, that's where you're going to go from being a data analyst, and then you'll hopefully transfer into being more database developer and then get into AI that way. One area that I'm really excited about telling you all about is being AWS solutions architect or working with cloud computing. Right now it's super in demand, and really no one learns it in school. So they're really flexible on they're really flexible with what your background is and where you've come from. Like our AWS solutions architect for Instra, he actually has a finance degree, and then he worked as a recruiter for a couple of years, and then he transferred into AWS, and he's excellent at what he does. And it's really about getting the AWS certifications, and we'll go through that on one of the links. It'll tell you what certification should you start with, where should you go. In an entry-level position for AWS, it starts at like at least $90,000 a year. And as you get more experience, it really goes up a lot. And then I'll also be speaking a little bit later about how do you get into management consulting, what that looks like. And you kind of need a little bit of either a consulting or a project management background. And you need a bachelor's in some kind of business or maybe engineering. But then also if you're trying to switch careers into management consulting, then they really look for MBAs and things like that. And really all you need to know in terms of technical experience is just understanding a technology roadmap and how you implement software at a high level. You don't need to be a software developer or anything. You just need to understand how do you kind of transform and evolve technologies and move forward and develop roadmaps and things like that. So yeah, we can go to the next slide.
So If I could interrupt, there are a couple of questions that just wanted to catch up on. One question was that when developing AI, can you reuse the code from, let's say, previous AI that you have developed? Can the code be reused? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. You can reuse your code. And that's why it's important to keep in mind how you want to develop your code so that you can reuse it. You don't want to make it only specific to one type of one specific use case. You want to develop it in a generalized way where you can just input new data and the code can learn from the new data that you put in.
Okay, thank you. The other question is more around like application of AI. Would QR code be considered a type of AI, or are they used in AI?
I would say QR code is just, I wouldn't say it's AI unless you're using it in another larger process. I think the QR code is just, I think it's the same way like a barcode works. So yeah, it's just a picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, now I'll speak what I do as a management consultant in AI. So I work with different Fortune 500 companies on assessing what are their current capabilities in AI. I work with their executive team on defining what are the future capabilities that they want to adopt. And then I interview their technical team on how are their processes working, how's the organization working, do they have all the people that they need, or do they need additional people, who's in charge of what, who is making sure that people who are testing the code aren't the same people who are writing the code, and working on what are their governance policies, how do they assess which AI do they want to build first and second and last, what key performance indicators do they use to assess that, and then how do they recruit their new members and how do they keep their attrition rates low, do they outsource some of their development to offshore developers, or do they keep it all based in the United States, and what are the pros and cons of each of those. And then I present to their executive team what is the cost benefit of making these changes and how should they prioritize the different changes as these AI capabilities are evolving, what are the capabilities that they should adopt first and last, and yeah, how do they achieve that maturity of a really robust AI process for the kind of needs that they're going to have in the future. And then, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about what it's like to work in an AI startup. So here, I would say definitely it offers a lot more flexibility with like your working hours and your just ability to work on different projects. And you're going to have to wear a lot of different hats. And really, like, we can always use more help if the person has the right skill set. So it gives you a lot more autonomy to start your own projects if you say, hey, and that's why we mainly look for master's and PhD students who have already worked on a lot of different AI projects so that they can see what do you think they can work on, or what do you think is a new department that we should open up in our company, or what's a new strategy that we could try, and how do we want to evaluate which strategy to go with for the future. And then also it's a good, there's also potential for some people who are qualified, if you're already working a full-time job and you're not sure if you want to leave it, like you can work after those hours for your full-time job. You could work with a startup potentially, or start your own company. And that really shows a lot of motivation and dedication, and a lot of employers like to see that as well. And it gives you an opportunity to still make a good salary with your full-time job, and then be able to still work at a startup and do some other things. So yeah, I would say it just offers a lot of flexibility.
There's a question, isn't statistics and calculus a preferred course one should take to get into AI/machine learning?
Yeah, it's, you can, I'm sure, like, if you do engineering or computer science or anything, you'll take those courses at some point. Statistics, definitely, like regression analysis, and then getting into logistic regression and all of those kind of things definitely like just helps you in the way that if you're able to understand abstract concepts with linear algebra and all of these kind of things. I'd say the main thing that school does, I wouldn't get too fixated on those like specific courses other than statistics and data science and stuff. But I'd say the main thing that school does is it teaches you how do you learn something that you might not want to learn when you start out, like calculus and these kind of things. Like we don't use it on our everyday basis, but it's just that if you can learn calculus, then you can learn AI and you can learn these other concepts. And each time you learn something different, you learn how to learn. And that's what it's really about, is just what's the best way for you learning? Some people, they like to watch more videos. Other people, they have to really try different things and work on real applications. And then other people can learn more easily from lectures and seeing other people do it first. And so it's just about you figuring out what's the best way that you learn. And once you keep learning new things, then the next thing that you learn is easier than the last thing, even if there's not a direct overlap with those concepts.
There's just one thing that I would add to this, that there are two very distinct things in AI and maybe in other industries as well, that the applied aspect of AI versus the theoretical depth, if you will. There's a lot of depth in things that Iman just explained, linear algebra, regression, and all kinds of things that data scientists study, and people who go into math or other sciences, they do. But a lot of it may or may not be necessarily required if you want to enter into what I would call applied AI. For example, learning how to train a model. You can understand the basic infrastructure. Here's the training data. This is what it does generally. So my point is, don't necessarily get caught up with, I need to learn statistics, which I believe everyone does anyway, or some complex calculus. Don't be scared of that, because that may not necessarily stop you, or not having a strong calculus background would not stop you from entering into AI industry. That's my main point here.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to the picture you were showing earlier, where the data science is almost its own field and there's some overlap with AI, but that's not always completely required for that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. There's one question, if I may ask, is related to the development. When you deploy, one of the people in the audience, when you deploy AI software to the field, is there situations that require model retraining down the road in future? Is there an automated mechanism to detect that the current training data is no longer valid?
I think Zubair Uncle could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. It does. There's a concept called reinforcement learning, which basically learns from what the model did not predict correctly. And you can deploy a model that can improve itself. And there are many ways of doing that. And some of those are things that continue happen over time. The model just continues to get better and better over time. And there are some simpler approaches that you can determine where the model, because you get metrics. When you train a model, you, even at that point, you know how good or how bad your model is performing. And that's one stage you can improve your model. But then when you deployed it and now you know that the model is having some problems, you can have approaches where you can basically retrain the model from its own mistakes. A good example of that was, you may have seen some videos of some science exhibitions where they create small insect-looking robots, and they learn from falling not to fall again that way. and over time they improve. So all such algorithms are basically learning from your own mistake. Very interesting and very powerful area, and a good question.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then I'll just go into one of the last topics quickly about cloud computing and how that fits in with AI. So it's really about, once you have these machine learning models and everything, how are you going to get it to your customer or to the user? And then how are you going to get the feedback from the model and send it to the front end of the application so that the user can see what is the output of that model? So that's where AWS, it's definitely the leader in these services. So if you want to get into cloud computing, definitely go through the AWS certifications. I know Google Cloud, some companies use that as well. So it also depends on what company you work for. But definitely I would start with AWS. And the real power in that is like Zubair Uncle was saying about how computer vision is really where AI is going to be growing the most in the coming years. And with computer vision, it's really data storage of all these images, all these videos, all these things. You cannot keep it on a hard drive or on a local server. So the cloud is really cost effective at storing that, at processing that, and then adding more data there. It does it at a really good cost. So that's definitely a really big benefit, is being able to have all that data and process those models through there. And then, of course, we all hear about different cybersecurity breaches and everything. So AWS also does a really good job with that. And then also AWS is always bringing on new services. There's always new different services that can help make it easier for you to write code or deploy models. And it's also just really scalable in the sense that once you have that one base architecture for one client, then it's really easy to copy it and then reconfigure it a little bit for the next client. And so you don't have to do a bunch of reorganization or develop a whole new architecture system for another client. So, and then also, of course, all these companies are looking for engineers because there's no cloud computing major that I've seen, at least at any schools. So this is something that no matter what your background is in finance or business or something else, if you get those certifications, then companies are really going to be interested in having your services. Yep, and then yeah, we'll get into some learning resources. So there's a lot of different resources, from really short and focused courses to year-long certifications through AWS and Microsoft and IBM. Coursera is a really great place to start, and Udemy. And then, yeah, there's a lot of different learning opportunities. And then in the next slide, we'll go to the link that I created for our company. And so, yeah, instraai.com. And then, yeah, if you go to the bottom of the website, there's learning resources, and then it will send you out to this page where you have a bunch of different videos, different courses you could start with. Fast.ai has a good course, TensorFlow, yeah, all of these that definitely let me know if you have any questions around that. Yeah, but thanks a lot for everybody joining, and I would open it up for questions now. And I think also we had a survey that we wanted everybody to fill out to let us know what are some areas that we can maybe start our next session on AI around, or if we can start new sessions, if there's any other topics that have come up that we could have a new session for.
Yes, what I'll do is actually as we have some more questions coming, hopefully, I will actually put the link for the survey in the chats, and we'll follow up as well with folks on the text and stuff. So we want to definitely get the feedback. Inshallah, please do that. In the meantime, if there are any more questions, please do share. Otherwise, what I'd like to request is each of the speakers to share any other perspective from their own that they would like to kind of any lessons learned, any other general words of motivation, wisdom that they'd like to share with the attendees. So maybe, oh, there's one more actually. Question here. Are you involved in any academic research related to AI? Are you part of any funded studies? Either of you can answer.
Well, the company
I'm
I
not,
work for,
but yeah.
yes, sir, the company I work for, yes, there are a lot of different initiatives from one of them that I was involved with was some contaminants in the soil that have bad effects on groundwater. And there is a whole bunch of thousands of chemicals that combined together are used to do what is called a signature of that harmful set of chemicals. It's a big issue in environmental industry. So there were I was involved in a machine learning based study of that, and yes, there are a lot of funded. I won't speak to many for obvious reasons, but this is one that general answer to your question is yes. I am involved as part of my work, not as a subject matter expert in, for example, environmental science, which is not my subject area, but from the standpoint of, for example, machine learning, if it's applicable here, can we benefit from that? That perspective, yes.
Okay. How do you make sure that models that are developed are robust enough to be deployed to production? What QA processes are set up? And are there QA specialists that need skills for testing and certifying models for production stage?
Well, I will say a few basic things and you might feel free to jump on. When we train a model, then the training process itself gives us metrics, which tell us how good is our model. Between what we traditionally do is say you have a certain amount of training data, which you want to use to train your AI model. You take 80% of that and give it for training and use it for training, and keep 20% away, which you don't show to the model. Then your model is validated against that data. So as your model is getting trained, training is an iterative process. So as your model is trained, continuing to get trained, it validates itself and tells you that my accuracy is this much. Then it goes through another iteration, trains better, then comes back and tells you that then the accuracy is improved. So over time, it converges to a point that you can see that, yes, this model is reasonably accurate. I would focus on the word reasonable because there's no perfect AI model. It's a function of what you're using it for. If you're using it for highly sensitive decision making, obviously the bar will be high. If you're using it, how many people are crossing this crosswalk? Maybe if you miss one or two, it's not a big deal. So again, the accuracy of the model is known when it's trained, and it can be improved as it is deployed. It can be retrained as well.
There were more than a couple of requests on presentations that be shared. So I'll work with the speakers, and I think they should be shareable unless there is anything in the slides that you speakers don't feel comfortable with, but our intention is to share that. So I'll work with the speakers and inshallah do that. How are the work? So there's a question about, I guess, Kamal Al-Rawi, what company is that? So I guess I'm not sure, sorry, what context your question is regarding. So if you could retype it. There's another question, how are the working hours in AI? Are there a lot of overtime requirements? I guess that would be maybe, Imad, you want to mention that?
I will let Imad react to that.
Yeah. Because you said there's a lot of flexibility in hours, because from my point of view, coming from California, startups are all about putting more than 40 hours. So, so there's question about overtime requirements.
Yeah, in our company, it's really, I don't know how many hours anyone is spending. All we really care about is the results that you provide us. But I'm sure it's company to company, it's different.
Yeah.
But for us, a lot of our members are masters and PhD students, or working other jobs during the day. So we're really flexible, and all we care about is what is the output, what's the result, are they moving stuff forward, or yeah, we just have like one weekly meeting with our team leads, and other people don't even have to join the meeting. So yeah, we're really flexible, and all we care about is the results and moving our technology forward. And we only have these specific use cases such that once it's developed, you can reuse a lot of these different parts of our code and stuff. And we're still looking for our first paying client. So once we get that, then it'll also change, and there'll be more requirements probably with that. But with the stage that we're at right now, it's really just about us trying different things, learning, and I don't even know how many hours anyone works. They just work until whatever time they have, and however interested they are, then they keep going, or if, yeah, it just goes like that.
You may want to clarify the model that you have in terms of hiring the employees, the people that you have in your team, right? So that would clarify to everybody also what you do.
Clarify what model?
Like how I think you're bringing them based on equity right now, or some, compensation wise in general.
Yeah, so yeah, it's just based on equity and learning. And yeah, that's why we work with PhD and master's students who are getting their first real professional opportunities with this.
Yep, awesome. Thank you. There's another question. For someone who's not a software developer or have significant technology background, where is the best place to start? Data analyst or AWS certification? Also, where can we find jobs within AI with startups? So the first question is data analyst or AWS certification for somebody who does not have a lot of technology background?
I would say AWS certifications, because with data analyst, I'm sure every place does it a little bit differently. So you need to figure out where are you going to be working and what kind of systems are they using. But I'd say AWS is pretty, anyone who uses AWS, they're using kind of similar services. And then I think the jobs within AI startups, I think that's a pretty big challenge, because a lot of these AI startups are pretty small, or they're not really looking for any people that they don't already know or have in their network. But I think a lot of my friends who work for startups, not with AI, but just startups in general, they went through Venture for America. So you could definitely look at Venture for America and apply to be a fellow there. And then they might have some AI startups that work with them.
Okay. Maybe what we'll do is, Imad, you and I will, after this later, we can dig out some resources links and put that in our slide before we share it, inshallah.
Just one thing I would like to add here in terms of starting point to this last question, that AWS certification, for example, as an architect, focuses on a lot of things. So if you want to focus on AI, make sure that you focus more on your own, on the SageMaker and related services, as well as learning the concepts of model training outside AWS, because the architect certification, for example, is a broader certification. It's not only an AI certification. It contains elements of AI deployment and model training and things like that using AWS infrastructure. And AWS, the best resource is really, as Imad pointed to so many, is to just take some use cases and learn on your own using AWS resources that you learned during your preparation for the certification, so that when you're done with your certification, you have some hands-on exposure to AI model development and training using AWS resources.
So one of the brothers, Kamal, was asking, Zubair, you were referring to a company when you were talking about the examination of soil using AI. So they were asking if you can share what company that was. Or maybe you were referring to your own company, CDM Smith. Obviously, you
Well,
were
yeah,
like,
that's, I think I was referring to the company that I work for, but there are
okay,
many companies in the civil engineering industry who are doing environmental uh, and groundwater and all those kind of things that involve AI and applying AI in various forms. There are
mm,
just so many applications within the environmental industry,
yeah,
especially more machine learning focused, more data driven AI analytics versus computer vision. There's less computer vision in environmental, while there is some from drones and aerial imagery, things like that. More
yeah.
which I can put into the machine learning then.
Another question, what would you recommend to a CS major um, looking to work in AI? Would a master's be helpful? And if so, which one specifically?
If someone is in the in school in getting a CS major, I will strongly suggest to take some courses related to AI and data science. Um, if someone has already completed his BS in CS and did not have any exposure to AI, I think, and is willing to go to grad school, that would be a great path forward. But it's very important to understand the pros and cons of going to a grad school versus taking specific certifications or trainings. There are even year-long courses. IBM offers one. There are many which are very hands-on and take you through 10 different, for example, areas related to AI, which from an AI standpoint makes you a much stronger person, but may not make you a stronger person from a CS perspective if you had gone to grad school.
Mm,
So it's something which varies from case to case. And the only word of caution I would say is that you have to really evaluate both tracks and make sure that you're fully aware of what you're getting into.
mm. Um, so one question here is like future forward looking as AI is becoming so powerful with so much potential, will it eventually has the capacity to steal our jobs, replacing human activities? Maybe you can just share your perspective. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about that, right?
Well, you see, the world has changed. If you remember, and some of you may or may not have been there when even when we started using computers at a large scale, people had that fear that jobs will disappear. I think the traditional jobs will disappear or reduce, but AI will bring and is bringing rise, and as Imad explained, to so many different jobs. So it's a balancing act that when any technology, if you recall the dot-com era, those who experienced that, a lot of people were saying this will happen, that will happen. So yes, it replaced some jobs, but it also gave rise to new markets, new employment opportunities, new academic pursuits. So I would not say that it'll just someday we'll just have no work because robots are doing all our work or things like that. At least uh, not necessarily.
Okay. There was one more question. Sorry. Okay. Can AI be used to study the inflection in stocks and investments to determine which company would be more beneficial to invest in?
Sure, it's widely being used. It's widely being used. There are I don't know if you may have heard that someone developed an algorithm that was performing a few microseconds faster than others. So their prediction was coming earlier than others by a few microseconds. And they were able to make a lot more money than others because their algorithm was performing. So yes, a lot is happening. I'm not part of
Yeah,
that.
these stocks are tremendous. I think they came up a few years ago, and they are all kind of looking at the patterns of how stocks has evolved over time, the
Yeah,
historical data, and based on that.
a lot of it's all machine learning and time series, but there are a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. It's not just that one stock price itself, but a
Right.
lot of things that affect that change in price.
Very true. As AI continues to take over more and more jobs, how do you think money generated by AI label will be distributed? I don't know if that's, it's again a very much an opinion kind of thing, but let me just put that up in front of you. As AI continues to take over more and more jobs, how do you think money generated by AI label will be distributed? Maybe there's a last
AI.
question on that line of thinking, but just let's.
So, how do you think the money generated by AI labor will be distributed? Is that the
Yeah, I'm not clear on the question as well, Zed.
so let's break this. The type of professions that Imad explained already are distributing the employment side of money. That's one side, and the other side could be that a company made a lot more profit by deploying AI. Obviously, that profit, one way or the other, is going back into the economy in terms of putting more money in people's hands. That's the other perspective. So it's the perspective that how you're looking at it. To me, even in my industry, some traditional engineers are very hesitant in uh, talking to me that can we do this using AI? Yes, we can. But then how would we bid on projects? Well, you'll be able to do more projects in shorter time. While you may think that people will say that now that you can do AI, you should charge us less, could happen. But at the same time, you can do a lot more with AI. So it's perspective that from where you're coming that will affect how you're looking at the money trickling down or sideways into different areas. I don't know that explicitly answers your question, but uh, anyone feel free to.
So let's switch to another question. If you know of any good books on AI that you can mention now, otherwise we can put them in the slides as well.
Yeah, I
Any
think
yeah.
let us keep that. We'll probably put something
Yeah.
for everyone as resources, not just books, as resources.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's about it. Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is at this time, I'd like to request Brother Razi to take over, and he's our overall lead for the CCE team. So Razi bhai, if you would like to please share any closing remarks, anything else? Eamon, you might need to unmute him. Eamon, if you're there. My apologies. The controls are not in my hands.
Okay, I think Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am online.
All right.
Nahmaduhu wa nasalli ala rasulihil kareem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. There is one ayah of the Quran in Surah Taha 114 that has been my favorite in all these matters for when we have had these seminars presented by very distinguished people. And that one is Allahul Malikul Haq wala tajal bil Qur'ani min fadli ilayhi rahi وَقُلُوا رَبِّ زِدْنِي ilma. The last one, وَقُلُوا رَبِّ زِدْنِي ilma, was, oh Allah, increase me in knowledge. That's what has happened today for a lot of us, with Brother uh, Faiz Sayyid leading this thing, along with Brother Imad Longi and Zubair Ghafoor. It was a very informative talk, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for increasing our knowledge and helping us start. Now, there's one thing I always try to point out, that when some people listen to these lectures, sometimes you get the feeling that you are overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge that people need. But let me tell you, there is always a place to start. You start, and as you work in that field, you will acquire more and more knowledge. Don't give up just because you think that you are not exceptionally good in calculus or statistics. That's not the point. The point is that you need to start moving, because if we don't do that, the world will leave us behind. The world is not stopping for us. We just have to be participant, and I'd like to uh, ask you all to participate in this thing, in this learning process, as we learn more and more of this new technology. Um, you know, and there's nothing you can do to avoid new technology. You just have to get involved in it. So make an effort, even if think that it is overwhelming. You'll be able to do it very well, inshallah. I'd like to thank um, the presenters, Brother Imad Longi and Brother Zubair Ghafoor, for their excellent presentations. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank the team who have put this presentation together. That for this AI presentation was led by Brother Faiz Sayyid, and then along with him were Brother Shoaib Khadri, Ashfaq Sayyid. The other members of our team include Dr. Abdul Khadir, Dr. Adil Khan, Ahmed Jamil, Arif Khan, Asif Dada, Ezra Hiram Bardeen, Kamran Hussain, Fahim Beg, Hamar Rahman, Kamran Asad, Wahab Khan. All of them contribute in their own ways towards making these programs successful. We'd like you to all participate in these programs, and we are going to be sending out a survey to everyone, asking you to we'd love to have you complete the surveys and send it back to us, so that we can get some guidance from all the participants. We've had a very good participation today, in spite of the short notice you all had for switching over from an in-person meeting to an WebEx meeting, which unfortunately was caused because of the health situation that we are in present, and we felt it was probably better to do it this way. But I'd love to have your comments and your input, and thank you again very much for participating in the session. I'll turn this back over to Brother Faiz Sayyid to see if he has any closing comments to it.
Thank you so much, Razi Bhai. And again, Zubair will be working class. Both Zubair and Imad are really, demonstrated that not only they're here for this presentation, they want to be helping. They're part of our community, so we are blessed to have them. I did want to mention Ayman Beg. He came from slippery roads, icy roads, from Toronto late last night, and this morning he was online with us. He's hosting this session right now. So thanks to Ayman, thanks to Abdul Rahman as well, there are a lot of people behind the scenes who make this happen. So he set up the WebEx session and facilitated the recording and all that. So So the broader ICN team, even if you didn't mention any names, thank you. And again, attending, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I apologize. I missed them, but they are fabulous. Without their help, none of this would have been possible, because
Absolutely.
they did so much to get this presentation up to the people.
So we have at least we are looking at doing monthly seminars. So if you'll be hearing from us soon. One of the questions was what's next. So we've been looking at different topics. Some may be related to deeper artificial intelligence in this area. Please fill that survey out. In there we have asked some of these questions, and also related to other technologies that you might be interested in as well. So the survey basically would allow us to organize our next events. And we want to also do an event on just general resume development, interview skills, things like that, because that is also a very creative thing. These days, your resume gets scanned so many times, and depending on what you're saying, it's a marketing vehicle for everybody. So we have experts who are going to inshallah join us as well in one of the future sessions. So that's pretty much it. Thank you, everybody else. Zubair, Imad, not to put you on spot, but if anything else you wanted to mention.
I would just like to
feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. And yeah, let us know if there's any ways we can help you. And thanks a lot for everybody coming. And hope to see you in the future events as well.
And I would just like to second what you both just said, that it was really a pleasure for us to be here and especially be able to share our things with the community is a great feeling. So likewise, feel free to contact if there's anything I can provide some guidance, some directions, or even answer some AI question. I would be more than happy to support that.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Be safe, inshallah. We'll talk to you soon. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Alaikum
Alaikum
salam.
salam. Thank you, everyone.